And welcome everybody to another fascinating, nothing like a good book, and this is a ripper. Boy, oh boy, when you do get this book, you're going to find some beautiful illustrations in it that have been done, hand done and professionally done as well. There's a mixture, but there's a lot of explanation goes through it from Dr. Brian Ackerman. And his book is titled Me, Myself, and Amygdala. Me, Myself, and My Amygdala. You know how sometimes we go, me, myself, and I. We had a boardroom meeting. Well, in this case, it's me, myself, and my amygdala. Overcoming addiction by understanding the brain. And this is according to the Harvard graduate, Dr. Brian. And he says in order for us to function optimally, we need our brain to function optimally. Mindfulness is the idea that we can train ourselves to become a witness to our internal thoughts in order to distinguish thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from our higher versus lower selves. And it teaches us to redirect our attention to the best part of our brain and mental functioning. Now, Dr. Brian L. Ackerman, MD, has worked in psychiatry for over 50 years, and he's explored the benefits of mindfulness in his brand new book, Me, Myself, and My Amygdala. It's a lively book, and according to Thomas G. Guthall, he's a medical doctor. He's a professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Might be a little biased here, but I don't think so. He says in this lively book, illustrated with technical drawings, cartoons, and explanatory diagrams, he provides a highly accessible format that incorporates novel formulations of psychology, neurology, and clinical examples galore. Well, that's pretty good to start off with. Dr. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Oh, Dr. Brian Ackerman, in this book, you propose that alcohol and substance use disorders, they are really self-injury disorders, and they address the two fundamental questions connected to self-injury, correct? And they are, why do humans self-injure? And how do we learn to manage more effectively our self-injurious impulses? Boy. So you also propose that we can learn how to understand ourselves so much better to the extent that we understand how our human brain works. So in the spirit of the new decade, you hope now that this new book of yours will tell us to take a step closer and show us how to learning to see ourselves with a 2020 vision. Is that your goal?
Absolutely. The bigger goal is to get us to appreciate what a just amazing brain the human brain is. It's the most advanced brain on the evolutionary market. And it does have a couple challenge areas that I highlight in the study in reference to the amygdala part, which is the fight or flight area of the brain. But the bigger picture of the brain is it's just simply amazing and unique and different from all other brains that have existed. For example, we're the only living entity that has a brain that is aware that we have a brain. So, which is just an incredibly interesting starting point. Zillions of creatures over zillions of years have existed with brains. None of those before humans had a clue that they had a brain. Then secondly, our brain is capable of allowing us to witness the interior mental life of our brain, which is another incredibly unique feature. And then thirdly, we can have the capacity to learn about our brain, and that allows us insight into how our brain works. And in the last 20, 40 years, there's been an explosion of information about the brain, which is now available to everyone to be able to use to understand how the brain works, and also be able to nudge it in the direction of working more optimally on our behalf.
Well, it's an ambitious undertaking. Do you agree?
I agree.
But I guess given the explosion of new information about the brain, even in the last 20 years, you're hoping to at least synthesize information from many related fields, right?
Absolutely. And the key is the evolutionary perspective. What are our brains allow us to do that prior brains do not do? How did the human brain evolve? What features does it allow us? And how do we access those? I know a lot of people with their cars, there's a lot of features in the car they never have actually learned how to use. So in our brain, too, it's equipped with all these incredible features. And it does not come with a user's manual. So we're left to kind of wing it and figure it out for ourselves. But for the most part, we now can, begin the beginnings of what a user manual for the brain would look like. And that's because we understand so much better about how it does operate.
Now, I think that's a very good analogy you used there about the car. I still don't know everything about my car. How about you?
Well, another analogy I've come up with to help us understand our brain is that in some ways, and particularly related to substance use and understanding human nature is the bigger picture, which is that it's almost like we're a hybrid car. We have two engines. One is an older engine, and the other is a newer, advanced engine. And the hybrid car works by shifting automatically. In our two engines, there is a psychology of self that is related to the fight or flight area of the brain, which is the amygdala. Now, the fight or flight area of the brain is really the tripwire for almost all human psychological suffering because it's a very small area, but it's devoted to aggression and fear. So who doesn't have too much anxiety or at times too much aggression?
Okay.
And when you add to that Freud's original description of depression was aggression turned against the self, we now have kind of, well, that's kind of interesting. Aggression turned against the self. And the thing that I uncovered in my work was that the human species is the first species to not only direct aggression outwardly, but against the self. For the first species to hit ourselves on the head and say, how could you be so stupid?
So how would you define mindfulness then?
Mindfulness is this unique capacity of another area of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is the most evolved part of the brain. And it's right behind the forehead and tripled in size over our nearest mammalian relatives. That gives us the capacity to observe ourselves and our inner mental lives. It also gives us the capacity to problem solve, to think through problems and come up with solutions that don't happen automatically. So the prefrontal cortex has the ability to weigh the pros and cons of something and can see what a temporary benefit it might be, like putting a piece of gum to, fix a leak.
All right.
And also to anticipate that long term, that's going to be a problem. That's not a permanent solution.
So why is mindfulness so important for our well-being?
There's a lot of reasons why mindfulness is important. We have to go back to understanding how each individual cell thrives. So number one, an individual cell, in order to thrive, has to take things into its internal environment that it needs to survive. Food, water, nutrients. But it also has to remove from its interior anything that's toxic, waste material. And if we look at how the human body is organized, it has all these overlapping filters. We have livers and we have kidneys And we have systems designed to not only distribute nutrients throughout the body, but also to liberate our body of toxic materials. So at the heart of mindfulness is the concept that the iconic image of meditation and mindfulness is breathing.
Okay.
Now, breathing is not just to get comfortable. If we really look at what breathing is doing, is that 12 times a minute, we are extracting from the universe that we're all intimately connected oxygen that every cell needs in our body to thrive. And simultaneously, we're squeezing back into the universe carbon dioxide, which if it stayed in the body, would be toxic to it. Now, if I jump ahead there, that's the body system, and the liver is doing similar detoxification process, and the kidneys are doing similar detoxification and filtering process.
Right.
And then we go to our mental states. Everyone has had toxic experiences. And we look at how do we free ourselves from our toxic mental experiences.
Right.
There is no lungs for the mind, and there are no kidneys for the mind. And we're, according to Houston, we got a problem.
well, you're right about that. The poor little mind's all on its own, isn't it? So
it is, except that the evolution equipped us with the capacity to realize we got a problem.
So what is
and because the prefrontal cortex is so loves to solve problems, it says, all right, if I can land someone on the moon, I can help myself and other people figure out how to liberate myself and help liberate others from toxic experiences. We know if they just stayed in, they're going to create havoc, and we know that there's no automatic filter to release them. This is where mindfulness comes in. It's a tool that you develop purposely to help liberate yourself from toxic mental experiences and realize that you have the capacity to do that through a series of steps, which includes identifying what's toxic.
Right.
Mentally, you become trained to become a filter to your own what is either beneficial thoughts or feelings, or conversely, toxic and wasteful.
So, Dr. Ackerman, how did your career in psychiatry impact your book, do you think?
There was a point in which the beginning part of my career put a great emphasis on the impact of the outside world on an individual. So I became a member of the original American Family Therapy Association that was involved with looking at the impact on significant others on one's sense of oneself. As my career evolved, I also studied at a psychoanalytic-oriented training center. I was also interested in the thoughts and the feelings that were going on inside an individual. And so a lot of my career has gone to kind of relate the inside to the outside.
Okay.
And then I immersed myself in Eastern religions because they seem to have a valence for figuring out how to help people become more peaceful. And I went back to the studies of the brain, and it turns out there are areas of the brain that are already peaceful. And that our task is to figure out, well, why aren't we spending more time in the living room of our brain?
Right. Good question.
Where it's got comfortable chairs and great TVs and air conditioning and much more comfortable. Why do we spend the time, as much time as we do, in the more irritated, agitated, distressed part of our brain, which is really small?
Okay, but with that in mind, what inspired you to focus on overcoming addiction, though, through mindfulness? What made you turn down that road?
Well, part of it was that I was the psychiatrist at a number of substance treatment facilities. And what I noticed was the recidivism. That is, the number of people that were in 1 week, came to treatment, got unaddicted, and then were back the next week and the next month or in the next few months.
Right.
And it appeared to me that the addiction model was only helpful to a degree in understanding what we were looking at. So what occurred to me was that there was another engine driving the addiction phenomenon, and that's what I talked about that you referred to earlier, was the existence of self-injurious impulses, which is once somebody's not addicted, why do they so quickly go back? And then the issue was, and if there is a self-injurious impulse and it's in the human brain, how do we even make sense of what it's doing there, given that we have the most advanced brain on the evolutionary market? And again, this centers the work on the fight or flight part of the brain. And the notion that there's such intense aggression there that unique to humans, we can also turn it against ourselves. That becomes a whole second driving engine. Because if you were a guinea pig addicted to opiates or cocaine, you really have no way out of that maze.
Right. The
part of the brain that drives you to press the lever for more and more and more of the drug has no capacity to realize it has an addiction and to take steps on its own behalf to overcome it. Whereas the human brain does have the capacity to realize it has an addiction. And then in order to survive, it absolutely has to take steps to correct it.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely amazing. There's so much involved with this. The book is fabulous. I mean, it goes in depth, but it gives terrific graphics and, cartoon drawings and explanations, and really you've got to read it and see it to understand it all. I could never cover in the time that I have with this interview to be able to do it justice, I don't think, but it gives you a bit of an idea. Grady Harp says, I always like to talk about some critics. The book includes a thorough description of the parts of the brain and their functions, which you do, as the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and the amygdala, which are responsible for our higher and lower forms of mental processing. Now, by understanding the different roles our brain plays, we can teach ourselves to direct our thoughts and behaviors towards that higher level of thinking in the prefrontal cortex, the astute blend of meditation and mindfulness with anatomical medical discussions and wise metaphors in both words and graphics encourages complete understanding and participation of Dr. Ackerman's healthy regime in treating substance abuse. That's from Grady Harp. So let me ask you this, Doc. What is meta-thinking and how does it relate to mindfulness then?
That's a very good question. So we used to think that our ability to think was what made us unique. And it turns out that when we pay attention to our thoughts, we just objectively take every thought we had over the course of the day and put it on paper and look at it and say, geez, what quality of thoughts did I have over the course of the day? And if you were being objectively looking at it, you would say, well, that thought wasn't really so useful or constructive or beneficial. And then there would be lots of thoughts that are like that. And there would be a few, just like you're sifting for gold, that would be fabulous. And you'd say, well, there's a ratio here. And I have to sort through all the counterproductive thoughts before I even get to the fabulous ones. Those are the ones that I want. And now we're back to the kind of filtering analogy that you do with coffee, which is you want to get the bitterness out so you can extract the flavor. What we're doing with mindfulness and meta-thinking is thinking about our thinking. When we think about our thinking, we go to a more careful examination of the thought. A meta-thought is a thought about a thought. And in that second thought, we make an appraisal of the first thought.
Fair
And
enough.
the distinction that we're making is it useful or not? And we develop the awareness that most of our thoughts are counterproductive, which is a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
But once we realize that most of our thoughts are counterproductive, now we're fine tuning our meta thinking to only select the ones that are beneficial. Or if inadvertently we've selected the ones that are counterproductive, to quickly drop them.
So, what advice then, Dr. Ackerman, what advice would you give to someone struggling with addiction?
Is to step back and think about that as human beings, we are equipped with the most exquisite brain ever afforded a species. And the name of the game in evolution is survival and thriving. When we have an addiction, we are moving in the opposite direction. We are moving counter survival. Our addiction threatens our well-being, and it even threatens our life. It undermines our work. It undermines our relationship. And it is, in that sense, self-imposed. So now we're back to the awareness, geez, I can actually behave in a way that's contrary to my best interest. Now, if I were a different species, I was wired to, at least in part, operate contrary to my self-interest, I wouldn't be able to fix that except for a mutation. But as a human being, I'm equipped with the capacity to realize I got a problem and take steps on behalf of correcting it. So if I were a green toad in a forest that burned down that became brown, I would have no idea of the danger that I was now in, that my greenness would expose me, nor would I have a clue about what to do about it. And the species would have to wait for a mutation to a brown-skinned frog to arrive for even the species to survive. But if a human being were in the same predicament, they would say, I get the problem. My prefrontal cortex allows me to understand I'm without my camouflage and I'm exposed to danger. I would head immediately down to Dick's Sporting Goods and get a brown hoodie.
I can see why you've done your book the way you did, because you're very expressive, you're creative, you're a visionary, and you tell it beautifully from a point of view of, when I looked through the book, I mean, it was an eye-opener, because the drawings alone tell a whole different story to
a picture's worth 1,000 words.
As the old saying goes, yes, indeed. And, I mean, it's such an intricate area. You mentioned that your mental dialysis exercise, if you like, that you do have participants do. How does it work, and how does it improve mindfulness?
What we're trying to do with the concept that I originated of mental dialysis is to provide the mental filter that we are not factory equipped with, other than the capacity to realize that we need a mental filter, to distinguish those thoughts and feelings and moods and attitudes that are truly beneficial to our well-being, and to separate those from, it's like separating the whites and darks of the socks, right, from the thoughts and moods and feelings that are counter to our well-being and impulses. So once we kind of sort them out and we can see them, we have a better chance at being able to liberate ourselves from the ones that are counterproductive. First, we got to become aware of them. Then we have to kind of sort them into, the categories they belong in. And then, like picking songs on a jukebox, we can pick the ones that are beneficial to us and distance ourselves, turn down the volume from them, and not reinforce the ones that have been counterproductive or would be counterproductive.
Me and my amygdala.
So part of that concept is rooted in the notion that because we have this fight or flight part of the brain, which generate every human being. It's not just substance use, it's all of us. It's part of our nature. We are factory equipped with excessive anxiety and excessive aggression. The way I imaged it was evolution, God, Mother Nature had no idea how much aggression, how much anxiety we would need to journey through life, and decided, like a nervous Nelly mother, to pack our knapsacks with excess amounts of each of them. And so we're walking through our lives and say, well, why do I have so much anxiety? Why do I have so much aggression? And the answer came back was, I didn't know how much you were going to need. I decided better to have more than not have enough.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to equip you with the part of your brain that has the capacity to realize the excessiveness and to trim it. That's why we cut our hair, cut our fingernails. We trim excesses. And we're training ourselves to be able to do that and appreciate what an amazing brain that we have that has these challenges for sure, but they're challenges that are within our wheelhouse of realizing in steps on our own behalf, of course, correcting.
Well, the book, fascinating, folks. You've got to be able to, you got to get yourself this one. It's not that many pages either to get through. It's enjoyable. It's a mindfulness guide to sobriety and well-being, because, the book really asks you to consider that. Let's use this analogy. If we were to Google an owner's and operator's manual for our brain, imagine if you could do that. That included care instructions. What would it say? And at the very least, he's hoping, Dr. Ackerman here, MD, he's hoping that if you read this thing and digest it properly, you'll be able to operate and care for your brain more effectively. And this, of course, helps you to live a healthier and more peaceful, drug-free life and help others you love and work with, at the same time. And that does help others or have tried or are trying to love and live with, to use and care for their brains. I mean, in closing, Doctor, this book is, who's it really aimed at, do you think?
Well, there's two aims. That specific book is aimed at both the people that provide care for people that struggle with substance use and the substance using population. But it's really designed for anyone and everyone because it's really about human nature.
Yes, right.
I have two other books coming out by the end of this year, one of which is for kids, because I think the next, in the groups that I teach, in the brain education groups I teach, the lament is, oh God, I wish I learned this when I was in school. And the book I have coming out by the end of this year is called Me, Myself, and My Temper. Again, temper being something that everybody has, not just substances. Every human being has temper, and it's excessive. And everybody has to figure out, what do I do with that damn thing?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. If you looked at this thing at school and learned these things at school, I would imagine, quite frankly, there wouldn't be so much abuse, wouldn't be so many accidents.
Yes.
There's a lot of things in life it affects, doesn't it?
Kids are really curious, and they love picking up this information. For those parents who've been working on this material with their kids, the kids are already telling the parents, Mom, you're having an amygdala moment.
All right. So I was going to ask you, do you plan to write more in the future? So, what topics would they be if you were? Now, you have mentioned
the other book
kids.
I'm also will have out by the end of this year is The Anatomy of Self-Directed Aggression.
Okay.
So that, and it's the understanding of treatment of self-directed aggression, so that, in the psychiatry world, we see a lot of teenagers who cut themselves and self-injure in that way. And again, this work is an extension of looking at the self-injurious impulse. But that includes self-hatred.
Right.
It includes body, we're the first species that can't stand ourselves at times.
Well, this is fabulous. Absolutely fabulous, Doc. I mean, the people, where can I buy this book? Where can my listeners go now? Obviously, Amazon.
Yes, Amazon's the easiest way to get it.
Okay, and where else?
It's in almost all bookstores you can order it through.
Okay.
And you can also get it out of the library.
Oh, cool. Okay. And what about, are you doing it on a site, your own site or anything? Can anybody buy from that, or is it mainly through the other outlets?
No, because through the bookstores. There's also the e-version of the book.
All right. Fabulous. Dr. Brian L. Ackerman, MD, ladies and gentlemen, is a Harvard Medical School trained psychiatrist who is the psychiatric medical direction of Phoenix House in Rhode Island, as well as the director of meditation and mindfulness services and training of Thrive Behavioral Health, and staff psychiatrist at AdCare and Community CQRE Alliance, where he teaches mindfulness educational groups for staff and patients. Fabulous. This is, wonderful reading, excellent drawings, as I said, cartoons, graphics, the whole thing is there. It's really, really good. The name of the book again, okay, it's called Me, Myself, and MyAmygdala. And it is a mindfulness guide to sobriety and well-being overall by Dr. Brian L. Ackerman, MD. Thanks, Doc. Fascinating stuff. I just wish I had longer with you, but maybe another time.
Okay. Pleasure to be with you, Mark.
Oh, most welcome. Thank you. And maybe these other books, too. Come back on that. They sound really good. The one for kids.
I look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye now.
Bye-bye.